Urgent. Lukashenko was so terrified he almost sat down. Minsk is all in, but the Security Council countered, backing the Batka into a corner. This secret move silenced Lukashenko. Tikhanovskaya's appearance was no accident. Putin was harshly outplayed in Kazakhstan. He was shocked. This was the last one to survive the Kremlin and secretly left for China. Only now has Moscow realized what happened. Russia is signing a capitulation. Zelenskyy has set the date and place for the meeting. A historic finale that was kept secret until the very end. Ukraine is triumphant and dictating its own terms. At this very moment, the White House flared up like a match. Trump is throwing Vance under the bus, a sensation they tried to hide. Trump's fate is hanging by a thread. All this and more coming up in our broadcast. Hotspot. At this very moment, Lukashenko has broken loose. But Ukraine's response made him sit down, all in. But the AFU is already prepared with a crushing response, and the appearance of Tikhanovskaya has backed the old man into a corner. The countdown for the regime has begun. All the details coming up.
Amid the growing threat from Belarus, Ukraine is not only strengthening its defenses in the north, but also warning Lukashenko against escalation.
Honestly, it's already tiresome that there is a constant threat to Ukraine, that at any moment the Russians might drag Belarus into expanding the war. They need to understand that there will be consequences for them and they will be significant.
Moreover, according to the commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Unmanned Systems, Robert Madiar Brovdi, Ukraine has already identified 500 potential targets in Belarus in case Lukashenko decides to take the risk. And so Lukashenko finally gathered his thoughts and responded to Ukraine, but couldn't come up with anything better than threats.
Maybe they have identified 500 targets. Thank you, because we also have 500 targets for them. We have one target, a very serious one, with precise coordinates. And it's not far from Belarus at all. But
along with such friendly hints, the Bulba-Führer assured that, in fact, Belarus does not pose any threat to Ukraine.
It never will. Never. Our soldiers have never been there and never will be. That too. He knows it and the military knows it too.
We've heard something like this before somewhere.
Can you now repeat that Russians will not come to us from the territory of Belarus?
Never. Especially not with weapons.
However, that's not the only thing Lukashenko once again repeated with such conviction and passion.
Everything else we've heard somehow echoes what Lukashenko was saying even before 2022, before the full-scale war, that supposedly there's no one to fight against Belarus or against Russia, that supposedly we could just drive in there on tractors. What's this about? He claims that the Ukrainian territorial defense and troops will not put up any resistance.
And here is in fact that very statement about the territorial defense and the collective farmers.
We can see who is standing on the border on the other side. These are people who were picked up off the streets, poor souls, Ukrainians, and the so-called territorial defense fighters. Yesterday's workers, machine operators, collective farmers, and so on. But
here it's important to clarify that Lukashenko got so worked up not only at the Kremlin's prompting. The Belarusian dictator was really triggered by the meeting between the president of Ukraine and the Belarusian opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and it affected him so much that he went from "let them," from Vladimir Sanich will forgive me, he moved on to the narrative about a drug addict.
Well, maybe something happened there. Maybe he smoked something somewhere, injected something somewhere, and so on. It happened, and he starts making this statement, I just feel sorry for him. That's why you notice. I'm keeping quiet. God forbid anyone ends up in such a situation.
Lukashenko didn't spare his words for Tikhanovskaya herself either, calling her a fool.
They say he invited our quiet fools and so on. I'm glad he invited them. Thanks to the Russians who noticed this, the TV people. I heard this program on RTR. It's good that they watched it at our so-called opposition. They are never an opposition, they're bandits.
The reason for such hysteria? For Lukashenko, it's very simple. The Belarusian opposition irritates him. And when other countries recognize it, Burbash loses his mind.
He tends to perceive and interpret any form of opposition, regardless of whether that opposition is tangible and real or what specific kind it might be, fundamentally and inherently as a direct threat to himself, in and of itself. Furthermore, formal invitations to Ukraine and frequent high-level diplomatic contacts and engagements serve to significantly increase and raise the overall level of subjectivity for the specific opposition figure in question. And that is precisely why Lukashenko is openly freaking out and openly hysterical. So the ongoing military and political support from Ukraine is already a very compelling and substantial reason to begin feeling a deep sense of concern.
You might think there's no worry. Lukashenko controls everything in Belarus and the Kremlin won't let anyone touch him. He might offend him himself, but he won't let others do it.
Belarus and Russia are not only the closest of neighboring nations, but also steadfast and reliable allies, truly strategic partners, and genuine lifelong friends.
But the answer is very simple. Even the mustachioed cockroach understands that Putin and Russia won't last forever and they'll come for him too.
It is entirely possible that it could eventually turn out that, with the continued strategic support of Ukraine, the Belarusian opposition will become his most terrifying and ultimate nightmare, in the event that the Russian Federation collapses.
Of course, he understands that if Putin's regime falls, he's finished too, but he still has hopes for a brighter future. He still holds on to those hopes. But the opposition, especially the one that is supported, puts an end to Lukashenko's dreams of a carefree old age. And
they are counting on preparing militants there from among Belarusians, Ukrainians, Poles, and even Lithuanians. And they will move in and seize control. Some district center. Listen, God forbid there is ever a military attack on Belarus from any territory.
Now let's get back to the targets in Belarus. It's unclear exactly what targets Madhya put on the list, but there is speculation that among them are Belarusian factories integrated into Russia's defense industry. According to Belpol, an association of former military and law enforcement officers opposed to the Lukashenko regime in Belarus, there are exactly 500 such factories. And of course, how could we forget about the Oreshnik? Lukashenko was so delighted that a one-of-a-kind installation was brought to Belarus that he didn't even consider that it's not that hard to pinpoint its location in the Wunderwaffe, which is exactly what Belarusian opposition members from the Belarusian railway workers community did.
According to railway transport data, this happened approximately between December 20th and 29th. A large military train arrived in the area of the Krychev 6 airbase. According to the shipping documents, the destination station was Krychev, one of the Mogilev division of the Belarusian railway, and the train departed from Kapustin Yar station on the Volga railway.
So, in yet another attempt to demonstrate his loyalty to the Kremlin, Lukashenko achieved the opposite effect. The deeper he drags Belarus into Russia's military adventure, the longer the list of targets becomes in case threats have to turn into action.
The great deception of the century. At one point, Tokayev signed Putin's sentence right during his visit to Astana. Only now has the Kremlin realized what happened. Poros TV will never tell you about this. The footage from Astana looked like Putin's triumph, but in reality it was the most humiliating deception in the history of diplomacy. Kazakhstan is squeezing billions out of the sinking Kremlin, delivering a fatal economic blow to Moscow. Watch for all the details. What friends they are! Smiles, handshakes, warm words, and even a tree of friendship planted together. If you believe the Kremlin, the friendship between Russia and Kazakhstan should be able to withstand any crisis.
After all, maintaining close, neighborly, and almost familial relations between the two states.
The recent meeting of the leaders looked exactly like that too. Moscow and Astana have agreed to build Kazakhstan's first nuclear power plant with the participation of Russia's Rosatom.
It is known that the Russian side will fully cover most of the costs. The active phase of the nuclear power plant's construction is expected to begin as early as 2027.
It would seem to be yet another confirmation that Kazakhstan remains within the Kremlin's orbit. But is it really that simple?
To politicians of global stature, you are consistently pursuing a policy aimed at strengthening Russia's status as a great power.
Here, I wouldn't even say it's so much about compliments. Compliments are one thing, that's fine. In my opinion, the whole story with the construction of the nuclear power plant is nothing more than smoke and mirrors for Putin, so that he thinks Russia is still the main partner, for Kazakhstan and all that.
Behind the pretty picture, there may be a much more pragmatic calculation. Because as long as Russia offers investments, Kazakhstan takes everything that might be useful to it. And at the same time, it is preparing for a future in which it will have to depend much less on Moscow.
From the perspective of transit corridors, Kazakhstan is indeed trying its best to build everything independently of Russia. And that's why I say that even from an economic point of view, the construction of a nuclear power plant is just a kind of showcase for Putin so that he doesn't notice everything else that's really happening.
In fact, a multi-vector policy has long been the foundation of Kazakhstan's diplomacy. Astana tries not to rely on just one partner and simultaneously maintains relations with Russia, China, Europe, and the United States.
Tokayev is pursuing a very multi-vector policy. And now we can list who are the key players for Kazakhstan today, the most important ones. Well, first of all, there is, of course, the United Kingdom and London. It is a well-known fact that almost all of the wealthy Kazakh oligarchs maintain their luxurious real estate holdings there. Consequently, if any political or social instability arises, they can quickly board their private jets and fly directly to London, where they establish their secondary lives. Of course, it is clear that Great Britain continues to exert a very significant and deep-rooted influence on the internal affairs and political landscape of Kazakhstan.
The agreement on the nuclear power plant can be seen not only as a gesture toward the Kremlin. For Kazakhstan, this is an opportunity to obtain an important infrastructure project, while Russia is still willing to invest resources and technology into it.
For Kazakhstan, of course, this is beneficial because building a nuclear power plant in today's world provides significant opportunities for obtaining electricity. That's why, of course, Kazakhstan needs this nuclear power plant.
What's happening in parallel is especially interesting. While Russian officials talk about alliance, Kazakhstan is actively developing transport routes that reduce its dependence on Russia.
Astana and Beijing are actively developing a new trade route to Europe that bypasses Russia. Now, goods from China will go through Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey.
And so, when this route is operating at full capacity, Russia will finally lose its status as the key transit hub between Asia and Europe. And billions of dollars in profits.
Those very same Kazakh banks and Kazakh companies are absolutely terrified and deeply concerned about the threat of secondary sanctions. And they make every possible effort to avoid participating in anything that could be considered toxic. From the perspective of transit corridors, Kazakhstan is indeed trying its utmost to build everything independently of Russia.
At the same time, Astana is trying to avoid open conflict with the Kremlin. Kazakhstan is not interested in a sharp break in relations with Russia. The economic ties and joint projects remain too close.
Kazakhstan simply doesn't want to make an enemy for itself because the border is huge, that's a fact. And accordingly, the danger posed by an aggressive Putin is significant. That's why they need to somehow distract him so he doesn't lash out at Kazakhstan. Because from the Z Patriots, we periodically hear the same old songs, that the Russian language is being oppressed in Kazakhstan.
Maybe Tokayev is offended that Putin just can't pronounce his first and last name?
Dear Alexander Kemelik, first of all, I want to express my gratitude for the invitation.
But seriously, really? Is Astana slowly but surely preparing to break away from Moscow?
They're pulling away, but backing out so that it's not obvious they're leaving. But they really are pulling away. It's just that politically, they're trying to do it very discreetly. But the economic withdrawal is very serious and very rapid. But politically, for now, they're camouflaging it.
As long as the Russian dictator sees Tokayev as a reliable partner, Astana is playing its own game. And perhaps the main question today is not how much Kazakhstan needs Russia, but how long Russia will remain essential to Kazakhstan itself. A historic moment. The occupiers' front has collapsed, and Zelenskyy has named the date for the final verdicts with Putin. Everything will be decided in the near future. This was kept secret until the very last moment. Russia's offensive has been officially recognized as a grand fiasco, but Ukraine is dictating its own terms. Shocking details. Stay tuned for more. In the administration of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, they see a window of opportunity to begin real negotiations with Russia to end the war. The president of Ukraine himself stated this in an interview with CBS News. Commenting on Brigadier General Andriy Beletsky's statement that Ukraine has 6 months to strengthen its positions on the battlefield before starting negotiations, Zelenskyy confirmed that, under favorable circumstances as early as this winter, Putin will be forced to negotiate. I
believe that before winter comes, we need to find a diplomatic way to sit down at the negotiating table and start a conversation. But this depends on the pressure on Putin, on the pressure within Russian society. And I think that this pressure is growing thanks to the sanctions. They should not be lifted but strengthened. This is the right diplomatic path. I hope that the United States will act in exactly this way. European countries have already adopted more than 20 packages of sanctions.
Analysts note that in the Russian-Ukrainian war, the circumstance that leads to real negotiations has finally begun to emerge. This is a shift in the balance of power in favor of one of the warring sides.
The law of the genre says that diplomacy is only successful when, on the ground, on the battlefield itself, one of the sides has some kind of power factor. If there is no power factor, then no matter what third countries intervene, if these third countries do not apply some kind of leverage of influence or military force on the side of one of the teams, or some kind of economic pressure, like the blockade of the Hormuz Strait, that's economic pressure against Iran, for example. If there is no power factor at all, then all negotiations will end in a deadlock. Take the Armenian-Azerbaijani situation after the First War, 26 years in a deadlock. Even though three countries, the permanent members of the Security Council, the US, France, and Russia, seemingly participated there. But as soon as one side won, Azerbaijan won, you see immediately the peace treaty was already much closer to being signed because there was a power factor. But here between Russia and Ukraine, there is no such power factor. That's why the front is at a standstill and everything is shifting into a completely different sphere, into the informational, ideological, and diplomatic spheres. And there, as you can see, everything is based in exactly the same way on this military component.
For almost half a year in a row, the Russian army has been consistently losing more manpower on the battlefield than it gains. At the same time, the Kremlin still does not dare to launch a full-scale mobilization. Terrorist strikes on apartment buildings with sleeping Ukrainians inside. For now, that's all the dictator is counting on. But even this does not lead to Kiev's capitulation. Instead, it provokes discontent from across the ocean. The massive strike on the Ukrainian capital, although not immediately, was harshly criticized by the US deputy representative to the UN. He called Moscow's actions barbarism. Perhaps that is precisely why Russia refrained from shelling Ukraine. On May 30th through 31st.
With Trump carrying out such strikes is more trouble than it's worth. So the situation in the Russian economy is constantly deteriorating. If Trump gets angry, he'll start ramping up sanctions pressure again. He has the resources for that. Well, it's just like sawing off the branch you're sitting on. And that's why basically it needs to end. And so theoretically, maybe that's how it will end, something like that. That is one ceasefire here, a second ceasefire, a third one. So not just once, but over and over again, stop and go. They were just fighting and fighting, and now suddenly they've stopped. And we're not fighting.
Are they connected in series?
Yes. So not one big step, but many small steps. Actually, that's typical for Putin. Even though he really likes to give the impression of being a macho man, in reality, he's not a very decisive person. He would much rather choose to cross an abyss in several small jumps.
Although there was no full-fledged ceasefire, as the Kremlin reported to Washington, with a ballistic strike on an important Christian holiday, the Russians destroyed a logistics warehouse in the city of Dnipro. The fact that the situation around the negotiations is becoming more active is also evidenced by the fact that, in just 2 weeks, the administration of the Ukrainian president is expecting shuttle visits from Trump's special envoy Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
I had an inside scoop. They were supposed to come right after the elections. Orban, they thought he would win. That's why now we see that Orban got nothing. They were supposed to come to put pressure on us. Look, Orban won, there won't be any money, so give in. But it didn't work out, according to that plan. But now we see things might go according to a different, more pro-Ukrainian plan. That's why these guys are now gathering in Ukraine.
An even greater success of the middle strike by the Ukrainian Defense Forces could become that very black swan for Putin, which would accelerate the willingness of dictators to negotiate. For now, analysts note that it is necessary to wait and see what the negotiators will bring with them to Kyiv.
Urgently, things started happening in the White House, and Donald Trump broke loose and began a harsh purge of his own inner circle, throwing J.D. Vance under the bus. Trump's future is hanging by a thread. A real power struggle has erupted in Washington. Documents confirm that Donald has started hunting his own people, but a successor is already being prepared for him as well. See the details.
The Vice President of the United States, and in fact Trump's successor, a person who has every chance of representing the Republicans in the next election, J.D. Vance, probably the person closest to the current President of the United States.
There has never been a president who has done more for Ukraine's survival in the war against Russia than Donald Trump.
But it seems that lately Trump has been wavering about his successor. He has started to ask more and more often whether Vance has the strength to make it all the way to the end. And he usually answers his own question. For now, he is not sure. The New York Times reports this, citing several sources from the White House.
As the default favorite for the Republican Party nomination and the potential heir to the president's political movement, Mr. Vance's fate largely depends on the enthusiasm and support he receives from Mr. Trump. Regular polls conducted by Mr. Trump asking whether people prefer Mr. Vance or the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, have become one of the most closely watched early indicators of how the Republican Party's power might shift to the next generation.
Trump's advisors say that he simply enjoys conducting public opinion polls and that he is not at all concerned about 2028. Nevertheless, it would be hard for Trump to ignore the fact that lately, the two men he calls children are gaining more and more prominence as the midterm elections approach.
The White House administration is wavering over whom to support in the next presidential election, Vice President J.D. Vance or Secretary of State Marco Rubio. It seems that Trump has doubted whether Vance could become his successor. The president regularly criticizes Vance on both personal and political issues. The article specifically notes that Trump has repeatedly brought up the incident when Vance dropped the American Football Championship trophy of Ohio State during an event at the White House. Recently, Trump has been comparing Vance's achievements to his own, and he emphasizes that without his support, Vance would not have been able to reach his current position. At the same time, according to recent reports from various news publications, Marco Rubio is known to spend a significant amount of his professional time with the US president and frequently accompanies him on various official trips and high-level diplomatic missions while working closely on key policy initiatives.
While traveling during his frequent flights, Donald Trump has often spent time reflecting on who is truly best suited to continue his political legacy into the future. The president has explicitly stated that whoever eventually secures this high-ranking position will undoubtedly become a very important and influential figure in American history. However, a serious and lingering question remains for many observers. What might happen if the wrong person is ultimately chosen to take on such a critical and demanding role? It would be a disaster. During this interview, Mr. Vance was observing Mr. Trump's answers from the back of the room.
75% of Republicans have a favorable opinion of Vance, and 64% of Republicans have a favorable opinion of Rubio. These are key figures. According to a Pew poll conducted earlier this year, Mr. Vance, he is much more recognizable to American voters than most other figures in the Trump administration.
According to a recent survey by the Rupert Institute, Vice Premier J.D. Vance's approval rating hit a historic low of -18. This is the worst result in the history of such polls. Negotiations with Iran and Pakistan ended without any results. Support for Orban and the visit to Budapest ended with the opposition winning the elections. These are serious image blows to the Trump administration. And it was J.D. Vance who led to them. Therefore, Vance's status as Trump's successor for the presidency is now in serious doubt.
Japan is entering the war. Tokyo delivers a crushing blow to Putin and pours millions into the Ukrainian armed forces. The Japanese dragon is going on the hunt. A secret order from Tokyo. Why did wild panic break out in Moscow after what was heard? Watch.
Ukraine has gained a new powerful and reliable ally, ready to help with both money and its own experience and technologies.
Japan has a great deal of manufacturing experience. The only thing left for us is to scale up and determine where to produce it.
For the first time, Tokyo has agreed to depart from its principles of neutrality and is allocating $15 million for the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine, as has already been officially announced by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In exchange for its investments, Japan hopes to gain invaluable Ukrainian experience in warfare, especially regarding the use of drones.
Japan is interested in Ukrainian approaches to using drones, not only maritime but also aerial ones. This concerns production technologies to a lesser extent and much more the tactics and integration with other means of warfare.
By the way, the first changes in Tokyo's rhetoric occurred last year with the arrival of the new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. And this year, with her party's victory in the parliamentary elections, everything was finally settled.
In the context of growing regional security threats, no country can ensure peace and its own security alone. Lifting the ban will allow friendly countries to strengthen our defense capabilities and prevent conflicts.
Japan is an extremely important military ally, experts note. Despite all its pacifism, Japan has not neglected to fill its own arsenals. Experts point out that militarily, Tokyo today can compete with any European country.
Japan has built 2 aircraft carriers, purchased F-35 fighter jets from the Americans and missiles for these jets. And the Americans pretended that, well, yes, it's just a destroyer with a flight deck where 20 aircraft can fit on one of the ships. Japan managed to buy 400 Tomahawk missiles from the Americans, signing the contract in time in 2023. You know, an exceptionally peaceful and friendly country that now has long-range capabilities. And
if before all this was only for domestic use, now it can be supplied to allies. Since 2014, exports were strictly limited to only 5 categories of non-lethal equipment. For example, for demining or rescue operations. Now, direct deliveries of missiles, warships, ammunition, and aircraft are permitted.
Does this mean that Japan is turning into a military power? Not yet. This is an element that is purely economic in nature. The military-industrial complex as such has not been formed in Japan. And despite all its exceptional economic and technological power, weapons production remains a weak link. Japan wants to give weapons manufacturers a broader range of opportunities to develop modern systems. And
the most advanced systems are unmanned systems. That's why there is interest in Ukraine. After all, our interceptor drones have proven in practice that today they are the best solution against enemy UAVs.
Instead of creating everything from scratch, it is possible to produce products inexpensively by adapting ready-made commercial components. And since we're talking about mass production, it's easier to make a profit and the production speed is higher as the market is developing rapidly. In this sense, the Ukrainian business model and accumulated experience are valuable. That's what is appreciated.
At the same time, Ukraine is willing to share this experience. At the state level, meetings have taken place repeatedly, the latest of which resulted in a new aid package of $6 billion being allocated to us. These are mainly investments in our economy, as well as non-lethal equipment such as transport for the military, bulletproof vests, helmets, and medical supplies. However, when talking about defense, we should not exclude air defense systems, specifically missiles for the Patriot systems. Patriots fit perfectly into Japan's current doctrine of not transferring weapons that can directly destroy enemy personnel or equipment. However, it seems that this rule will soon be broken. After all, in Japan, the population is already openly supporting the militarization of the country against the backdrop of threats from China and Russia. And it seems there is now an understanding that the status of being eternally neutral is not a salvation.
China is seriously concerned about this decision. In the past, Japanese militarism led to aggressive expansion and to grave crimes against China and its neighbors in Asia.
At the same time, the first attempts to reach the international level of supporting Ukraine, specifically with weapons, have already been made. Following its participation in the Purell initiative, Japan will, for the first time, send its military personnel to NATO's headquarters for Ukraine. This involves coordinating military assistance and participating in the training of the armed forces of Ukraine. Additionally, experts do not rule out the possibility of direct weapons transfers in the future, from stockpiles in warehouses.
These vital materials are sourced directly from the massive, strategically managed stockpiles that have been meticulously organized and maintained within the expansive, high-capacity industrial warehouses situated across various key locations throughout the entire region. Will it come to the transfer of weapons?
We will obviously see in the very near future. Japan has finally become actively involved in the war against the axis of evil, which in itself shows that the Kremlin's hopes of exhausting the world through war have proven to be futile.
It's begun. Crimea and Donbas are being liberated right now. The Rostov-Crimea corridor has been turned into a death trap. The hour X has come. The Ukrainian armed forces have taken the boldest step in history and begun a total sweep. A fuel crisis is already being recorded in the occupied territories. Watch all the fiery details right now.
While Putin continues to spout utter nonsense and refuses to believe in the defeat of the Russian army at the front,
our troops are advancing in all directions. Well, you see it yourself every single day.
Every single day, Russian troops are only getting hit by strikes from the Ukrainian armed forces. And that's happening on every front, from the front lines to the deep rear areas. Even Kremlin propaganda itself can no longer remain silent about it.
We have reached a point where offensive capabilities surpass defensive ones.
In the past few weeks, the Ukrainian armed forces have been focusing closely on the so-called land corridor to Crimea. We are talking about a section of highway that connects Rostov-on-Don with the temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, and then leads to Crimea. It is along this specific transportation route that the occupiers have been, or rather, were consistently accustomed to delivering heavy equipment, ammunition, uniforms, fuel, and all the other essential supplies they required. Now, thanks to the swift Ukrainian drones, the local highways look something like this.
Another one hit. And another one hit.
Recently, scenes like this can be seen on most roads in the primary region. Many drivers are already refusing to travel along the so-called land corridor to Crimea.
Yesterday, 2 more vehicles were shot down by UAVs. The guy said that right in front of them, something exploded up above.
And it will only get worse from here, Russian propaganda notes with sadness in their voice.
Unfortunately, the new territories are taking the brunt, especially lately. The enemy is striking with UAVs and doing everything possible to cut off logistics. The Vasilyevka-Enerhodar highway is also under threat. The road along the Sea of Azov from Mariupol further to Henichesk is constantly being hit. Now the targets are becoming cargo trucks and fuel tankers, which are used not only for military purposes but also for civilian needs. Therefore, a fuel crisis is looming as well.
The lack of gasoline in Sevastopol is a consequence of systematic enemy strikes on oil refineries and fuel trucks along the land corridor to Crimea.
But the catastrophic fuel situation on the occupied peninsula is just the tip of the iceberg. Ukrainian drones have brought the main artery of Putin's war in Ukraine under operational fire control. And there are rumors that the bunker dweller is having another tantrum and his cardboard generals are being forced to find a way out of a stalemate. After all, in addition to roads, the Ukrainian armed forces are actively destroying the enemy's transshipment bases.
How can this be countered? At the moment, it can't. In our view, only MOC, mobile fire groups and observation posts can provide such defense. Because the targets are not high speed, cannot actively maneuver, and fly at relatively low altitudes up to 100 meters. Because they are not visible on air defense radar stations, they are insensitive to EW, electronic warfare, because they either operate autonomously or are equipped with Starlink dishes.
Thus, the strike zone of the Ukrainian armed forces expands to 20, 30, or even 50 kilometers into the enemy's rear. At such distances, drones strike all convoys heading toward the Sea of Azov, and any preparations by the Kremlin for an offensive or troop transfers end with massive UAV raids.
Due to the destruction of Russian Ural and Kamaz trucks at depths of 30 to 50 kilometers, the Russian command has banned the movement of convoys and requires the use of mobile fire support groups to escort logistics convoys. Some Russian depots are being relocated to Russian territory.
In reality, this means only one thing. With each passing day, it is becoming increasingly difficult for the occupiers to supply their troops in Crimea and beyond. The Ukrainian tactic of cutting off the enemy's supply routes is bearing fruit much faster than anyone could have imagined.
The carrying capacity of a supply convoy quickly decreases as the distance it needs to cover increases. In a hypothetical convoy traveling 50 kilometers at an average speed of 50 kilometers per hour, each truck driver can make 3 trips per day during a 12-hour shift. 1 hour for loading, 1 hour to drive to the delivery point, 1 hour for unloading, and 1 hour to return to the logistics base. A total of 4 hours per trip. Throughput capacity. Capacity drops by 33% if the distance increases by another 50 kilometers. 1 hour for loading, 2 hours to drive to the delivery point, 1 hour for unloading, and 2 hours to return to the logistics base. A total of 6 hours per trip. That means only 2 trips can be made per day.
For the Kremlin, this can mean only one thing. Their time ruling the peninsula is coming to an end. This is well understood by the local collaborators, who according to rumors are already evacuating their families from the peninsula, and are actively packing their bags to flee. This is how control over supply routes becomes one of the key factors in the development of combat operations at the front in 2026.
That's all for now. For more hot news from the front, tune in to the next episode.